welcome to another episode of the World Football Show. I'm your host, Mina, Rozuki. And it's been another crazy weekend of football. Of course, in Spain, saboteurs have forced the game between Rayo Vallecano and Real Madrid to be postponed, so it will be played tonight. Meanwhile, in Italy, the only saboteur is Cagliari president Massimo Cellino, who invited the fans to come to the stadium despite the fact authorities had asked for the game to be played behind closed doors due to for security reasons. But despite when he had earlier done it, the match was forced to be cancelled. It will be possibly 3 points for Roma, and that is exactly what happens in Italy. This is Sports Night Live. Please can we welcome my co-host. This is Raphael Honigstein. How are you?
Hello, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Are you surprised by what happened in Italy?
Not really. I mean, Cellino has been playing a cat and mouse game with the Italian FA and the league for a while now. There's this big debate about him wanting renovations. Cagliari, the council is not giving him the money. So he's now forced the issue to the point where he's invited fans to a game that they couldn't attend, which I think
it's
was
just
not
absolute madness, isn't
not
it?
a
I mean,
great
this really
idea.
only happens in Italy. Like
Yeah.
this, you know very well that you can't invite the fans down. You know, and you post something on the website that says, "Dear season ticket holders and fans who want to watch this game, please do come along," despite the fact that we're not allowed to. Because I looked at the stadium, this is the IS Arenas, and think that it's all right. So why not? You can come down and see it.
Yeah, it's really nuts. I mean, he did make the point that they should turn up in an orderly and civil fashion. But really, I mean, the serious point is after all that's happened in football with stadiums and, you know, with the recent renovations of Hillsborough, that's the last thing you need. You can't invite fans to a stadium that is not safe. Even if it's just to put pressure on the authorities, it's just you're playing with fire, and you can't have that kind of conflict on the back of your own fans.
No, of course not. And probably Roma will walk away with 3 points because they've complained and said, well, we arranged for the flights, we arranged for our fans to come down, and we don't see why we should be punished for this.
Yeah, but I'm not sure. I mean, they're losing out in terms of financial loss, but should they really be awarded the points? I don't think why
Oh, you
one,
don't think they should?
Well, I'm not sure that one necessarily you know, leads to the other. I can understand why they want to punish Cagliari for what they've done and therefore award the points, but I don't see how Roma can really claim that because the game didn't go ahead, they then should get the points.
So basically, they've arranged for this plane, for their plane to go there, for the hotels to be arranged, for their fans
Yeah,
to
they
go
should
to
be
travel.
reimbursed for that, but
The game should still go ahead.
Yeah.
I mean, they're lucky because they had so many people unable to start that game. So this was going to be a tough match. And of course, this was the perfect time for Cagliari to play Roma because of all the absences. And now they've lost out on an opportunity where it could have been an easier game for them than they had hoped. But do you think this is going to cast a shadow over the Serie A and make it even worse for other people when they think about this league and they think, oh, it's just corrupt and no one can sort out a stadium?
It doesn't reflect too well on the league, and of course they need a long-term solution because last year we had the spectacle where Cagliari fans had to travel all over Italy to see their games because they couldn't be played at home. Now the situation with the stadium is still not resolved, and of course it's not the easiest place to go to. As you said, for other fans. I mean, I think until the stadium issue in a wider context is sorted out, and until you see more teams do what Juventus have done so brilliantly, which is basically build a new stadium, make it a much more inviting, modern experience, Italian football will continue to struggle. And I think that's a perfect illustration of that.
Yeah, I agree. We do have Tancredi Palmieri with us here, our Italian football correspondent. How are you, Tank?
Guys, I'm so happy because I've just been all around England in last week. The only bad thing is that, unfortunately, the bad weather came in my luggage and now is all over Milan.
This is why I tell you, London is not necessarily the place to be. But
I was in Manchester, even worse.
Yeah, it's probably even worse. Well, we've got to ask Tevez about his opinion on that. But anyway, on to Serie A. Do you think that Massimo Cellino is making a mockery of Serie A?
Well, if Massimo Cellino is making mockery of Serie A, for sure Massimo Cellino is receiving the payback for his action, because just a few minutes ago, the Italian sport justice sentenced the nil free against Cagliari in the game versus Roma. I don't know if you have explained what happened. So it will be near free. So for sure, Cagliari lost the game. But now the judge is even thinking, because probably it's not sure if when the decision will arrive, but anyway, should arrive in these days. Probably will arrive also at least 1 point deduction for Cagliari, and might even arrive at least one game without any attendance for Cagliari. So if he thought that he was doing a smart move, that was probably one of the worst possibly smart move ever.
Okay, Tancredi, just sum it up. Do you agree? Raf thinks that, Roma shouldn't just be awarded 3 points. They should be reimbursed, but the match should still be played. What do you think?
No, I think that this is the right decision, because we live, Mina, in a state of order, in a democracy, but where there are rules, rights, and things to respect. A president of a club, even if it is a club of Serie A or whatever, of a first division, can't honestly take a risk to call all the fans to come to stadium, even if the judge called that the game will be without any attendance. This is an open challenge to the system, and not even for a reason for which is worth to fight, but just because actually there weren't the guarantee of safety, of public safety, to play in the stadium where Cellino wanted to play. So actually it wasn't even right. And if we start to allow behaviors like this, that is just the beginning. A lot of times we have spoke about all the grotesque things happening in Serie A. At last, one thing has been sanctioned.
Tancredi, do you think that it might, doing what Cellino has done, might be a solution for the two Milan teams as well? Because they can't play at home, it seems. Again, another bad round of defeat for both teams. Of course, Inter losing at home and Milan away to Udinese, and the curse continues.
I think someone spotted yesterday the Milan CEO Galliani doing a raining dance on the roof of one of Milan buildings, because if this storm keeps on for 3 days until Wednesday, maybe they won't play in San Siro. But the thing is that there is no salvation. Can I say one thing? There is no salvation until Allegri is on the bench. I'm sorry to say that, but even against Udinese, the first 15 minutes of this reaction of Milan, that was all a reaction by heart, a pride reaction, and then just the things went lost as usual. Not a single idea of tactics, not a single idea of game. If haven't been good so far until now, why should go better in the next games? It's just, honestly, in my opinion, it's just an agony. Even because for people watching Milan, wasn't different in the past years. Just the Ibrahimovic, that was the difference.
Okay, but Tancredi, don't you think that Allegri is an easy scapegoat? I mean, it's very convenient for both the Milan fans and the Milan club to point the finger at this guy, whereas the deeper reasons for the team's problems are really having to do with Berlusconi stopping to spend money.
No, I don't think that's the only
completely
reason.
selling every top player.
No.
And when your top player on the pitch is Kevin Prince Boateng, you're a team in trouble.
Yes, but they are still, as a squad, better than most of the teams that they are playing. They are still, as a squad, they boast talent in different areas of the pitch. They shouldn't be suffering as much as they are suffering. And he's had Zlatan Ibrahimovic and Thiago Silva to rely on for so long now. You know, you have two world-class players. You don't need to do anything. You could just give it to them and see what happens, you know? And that's what essentially Zlatan does. But without them, I do think that this is when coaching needs to play a role. And I don't think Allegri is doing a very good job. You agree?
More or less, I think, yes. The thing is that what my point is on that, simply because it's not the different kind of game that we have seen in the last 2 years, okay? Last week, what is last week? I don't remember if I quoted that already in the previous episode that we had, but what Allegri said last week was absolutely symbolic. He said, we should realize now that we don't have anymore the kind of player that is solving the game for us. And now you realize you had 2 years just to take your time to build up some game. See, Raf, you are absolutely right. Of course, Allegri is not the only problem. It's not the only problem, because when you cut budget from 100 to 50 to 0, of course, you will feel that and you will be affected. But I must say that there was no pressure in that way on Milan about being already the competitor for Juventus. But with the experience that Allegri have and with the way that the group is behind him, because actually, as far as we all know, there is a good relationship between players and the manager. With all of that sort of relationship, the experience, you know the milieu, the atmosphere, the ambient where you are working, it's absolutely not acceptable that at the low level at which Milan is playing. There is really no salvation. We haven't seen in these first four official games absolutely nothing, nothing. And it would be more acceptable, even if it's not, if we would see that on Inter with Samaccioni, not with someone that is already 2 years there.
Yes, you're right. I do agree with you. But Tancredi, I'm going to have to say bye to you now, and I hope I can speak to you next week with regards to even more that's happening in Italy. But I just wanted to gauge your opinion. Do you think that it is a case of him? You don't think that? You think it's quite harsh to blame Allegri for what's going on in Italy at the moment with Milan?
Well, we know that last year already they had problems, and you're right. Ibrahimovic papered over the cracks. It was very much give it to him and he'll save us, and that was enough to finish in the Champions League places. But still, I think that the main problem lies elsewhere, and it's very easy to blame the coach. If you are a top
with
club
injuries and everything
who
that's
lose the whole spine of your side very late in the season's preparation as well, and simply don't replace them, not only do you have a loss of quality, but also a loss of morale, because the players that are there are looking around just like the fans and thinking, you know, who are these guys that are going to do what Ibrahimovic did? Who are the people that we're going to rely upon in these games? And I think they've been in a downward spiral from the moment they sold Ibrahimovic and Thiago Silva, and they've never recovered, not off, not on the pitch. And it's very easy, that's what I'm saying, it's very easy to point the finger at the coach.
You're right, he is not entirely to blame simply because they are a side that, you know, have a lot of injuries. They don't have their players like Pato and Boyan that could possibly do something for them up top. But I do think there's a certain level of, you know, Gattuso complained about him. Inzaghi apparently had a fight with him midweek that they came out in this really weird circumstances on the Milan channel. Actually, we're really good friends, yes, I'm sure you are. You had so many people talk about him afterwards, Allegri, and sort of say that they didn't like him. They didn't like the direction that Milan was taking it. There was no discipline anymore within the side. So surely he's going to start.
But why is no one pointing the finger at the real problem? I mean, the real problem...
What, is it just money?
Yes.
No, that's not just the only problem.
No, but that's the real...
Udinese have never had money, and they make it 3, what?
Yes, but Udinese have never relied on the kind of star system that Milan have relied upon. Their system was, for many years, it's just we buy very good players that make the difference and forget about sort of team building and a collective approach. That's what they've done for many years, and it's good enough to get you to a certain stage. If it stops from one moment to the next, and now you're suddenly expecting Allegri to do what Udinese or other teams are doing with a more collective approach, it simply won't work. It certainly won't work overnight. Whether he's the right man for the job is a completely different argument, but I think it's very easy for all these old guys to come out and snipe away at Allegri, perhaps as he hinted, even though he's denied it, with the view of actually, you know, furthering their own position going forward, knowing that Milan love to appoint from within their own ranks, you know, so there is that element as well, of betrayal perhaps from his point of view. Even put that aside, I think it's much easier to have a go at him than at the people who are really making the decisions at Milan, who've let the club down, in my view.
Well, yeah, you're right, because Galliani, I do think that at the time when Leonardo was there, they were making the right choices. They were picking up the right players who would make the difference and grow into their role, such as Kaká and perhaps Pato if he didn't get injured every day. But let's talk about Juventus. What about them? You know, no one thought that they could manage to do it in the Champions League.
Do you really think no one thought it? I mean, I don't know. I don't see why a 2-2
Everyone kept saying that the reason why they did so well in the league last season, although they gained so many draws, not enough wins, was because of the fact that they were playing once a week.
Yeah, well, it helped, of course. I mean, we saw it with Dortmund as well, especially if you play that system, you know, which is so based on running, on closing down. It's difficult to sort of put in kind of 75% performance levels if you play that kind of football. So in that sense, of course, it didn't hurt not playing midweek last year.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, we have to still see if they go deep into the Champions League, whether they will be affected. But I don't think it should come as any surprise that they would draw against the Chelsea side that are very talented, but also in transition, who have a lot of firepower up front. but almost no holding midfield. So, you know, all the strengths of Juve in midfield, all the power, you'd expect it to come to the forefront.
Yeah.
And if they had a decent striker as well, they might have even done better.
Well, at least Bentner played a couple of minutes. That's all we have time for in Italy. Do join us after the break, and we'll be discussing everything that's happening in Spain. We'll see you then. Welcome back to the World Football Show here on Sports Tonight Live. Now we're moving on to Spain, and of course it's another weekend of madness, especially with what's happening between Rayo Vallecano and Real Madrid. Now, do you think this is a case of, you know, vandals? Apparently the understanding of it all is that the vandals have done this because it's a sign of protest against the board who hiked up prices for the match against Real Madrid. Now, they're angry, obviously, because, you know, they had arranged for them to play it this day. They don't want to play it today. And if they do play it today, Real Madrid, they want to play it at 5 p.m. So they're already angry that it has to be played at 7:45. What do you think is the reason behind this?
Well, it's difficult to know. I mean, you have to ask the people who cut the wires. There was initially, I think, an explanation that Vallecano just said it was saboteurs because they were embarrassed that the floodlights had changed. So the story is kind of changing all the time.
Really?
Yeah.
That's what
I was wondering what... I'm interested to see what our correspondent's take on this is. But I think we haven't quite heard the real truth behind this. But the good thing is, you know, the game will go ahead on Monday night. So at least it'll be quickly resolved. It won't drag on for a while. And I don't think Real Madrid can really claim much inconvenience. Yes, it's 24 hours later, but these things happen all the time, and it's not exactly far to travel.
No, exactly, that's true. We've got Tim Stannard back with us. We've missed you, La Liga Loca. You haven't been on for a while. What is your take behind this? There are so many conspiracy theories flying around.
I know, when I was there last night, and it's one of those things that when you're actually out where everything's going on, you're the person who knows the least. So managed to get into the stadium there. Along with the only people there were the Real Madrid fans who actually were allowed in just for safety reasons. The players, of course, employees. And as it stands at the moment, there was talk on Sunday night that it was sabotage. However, in light today, no one actually wants to say that until a police investigation has been completed. At the moment, the police were there this morning looking into it. Some photos were published. Of course, we don't know whether or not they were of the damage with wires cut. So the question is, who did it? How do they get in to do it? And how do they not electrocute themselves in the process, which is an important one as well. And there is, as you said, there has been Rayo Vallecano fans. I'm going to support them. I don't know whether they did, perhaps not in this particular incident in the past. They have done a very inventive process about writers and season ticket prices and this day of the Christmas, where the socios, the members, have to pay an extra 25 euros or so on top of their season ticket just to watch Real Madrid and Barcelona. These are fans who support them near bankruptcy all over Spain, down in the 3rd division, and they've been asked to pay again. Last season, their protest was to sort of vacate one of the main stands where they cheer on the team, and also to pay for their 25 euros in change as well. So they just brought big bags of money along to the ticket office. This seems to be a step further, and fortunately last night the supporters, from what I could see, were very well behaved, very patient, but the game didn't go ahead. I was out in the stands there, you could see the Real Madrid players wondering really what was going on, warming up, warming down. They didn't know whether the game was going to go ahead, but instead they returned back to the hotel, and we're back again on Monday night. So it's going to be my second trip to Vallecas in a day to watch the first game.
And how does Jose Mourinho feel about the fact that he's been forced to play this at a time that he didn't want to play at, on a day he didn't even think that there would be a match?
I think he's probably going to prefer to get it out of the way. The reason why they said 5 o'clock, excuse me about the phone on that one, the hot news was going on in Vallecas. Well, yeah, this is he said, she said a little bit. Apparently, Jose Mourinho wanted to play at 5 o'clock because the club on official announcement said they couldn't guarantee, Real Madrid felt they couldn't guarantee the floodlights are going to work. They have done a test in the afternoon, so the game is going to go ahead. Rayo Vallecano wanted to play it later on because they said, well, it means their fans who have got jobs or children can't go along to the match, and that playing it at 5 would certainly help Real Madrid because you wouldn't have all the supporters there cheering along Rayo, so it'd be a bit of an empty stadium. So the main thing is it's going to go ahead. The time twitched. It was basically a mad night on Sunday of people not knowing whether it was going ahead, the reason for it, and what was going to go ahead on Monday. But it's going to be out of the way, and I think you're right. Jose Mourinho will be happy to have the game played. It's not too much of an imposition. You could say it's an extra day's rest, so an extra day's preparation. Although it's an extra day for all the players to be together with all the talk of some of the riffs in the dressing room, maybe that's not the best preparation.
Tim, to happier events and Barcelona winning again, keeping up the perfect record. But would you say that the results have been slightly misleading in terms of performances, or is this just a game that we have to get used to, that Barcelona will probe and probe and probe and perhaps not always look as if they're in complete control, or at least as if they're creating that many clear chances, but then they always overcome the opposition in the end? So is it, in other words, is it a function of their brilliance that sometimes the game looks as if nothing's really happening, or are they not quite at the level that you'd expect them to be? What's your take?
Well, they're slow starting. I went to watch them against Getafe last week in Getafe, and again it was 4-0 victory, but it wasn't brilliant. But they sort of, as you said, you don't really win anything in September, so they are saving their energies. Maybe some of the players recovering from the European Championships, but just trundling along, basically doing the minimum to win the games. The Granada match over 90 minutes, you think, wow, they had a little bit of trouble there. They weren't so good. But then you sort of see the highlights package where you just see chance after chance after chance being saved by Tonio. And you kind of forget this was a game, had they won it 5 or 6-0, you'd say, yeah, that was a really good victory. But because it was only 2 and very, very late, everyone sort of jumps up and down on it. The positives of Barcelona is that they've won 2 away matches they lost last season against Osasuna and Getafe. And Real Madrid are way behind, and they've got 5 wins from 5, and that's very important for Tito Vilanova. I think had he got to a very slow start, a stuttering start, he might have had some troubles, but there's no doubt now that he's going to be leading Barcelona for the rest of the season, I think.
Well, I think Barcelona did quite well to overcome their Champions League game against Spartak Moscow, and of course Unai Emery, who tried so hard to defeat them. But now Unai Emery's gone and Valencia keeps losing. Now, there is a little bit of a luck issue going on there. They keep sort of hitting the crossbar and not managing to convert their chances in the way that they had hoped, or some refereeing decisions. But is it all doom and gloom for Valencia, or do you think that perhaps Pellegrino might get something out of this team?
No, he's going to be sacked within a month or so. And it serves Valencia right. I'm going to be a little bit harsh here because Unai Emery was a perfectly good coach. The same thing happened to Quique Sanchez-Flores before him. Valencia are going to finish 3rd. If they finish 3rd, it's a great success. And that's what they've done over the past 3 years, bearing in mind the players they've had to sell. If they could have kept, for example, Silva and Mata and Alba and Villa, they'd have a pretty good team. So Unai Emery did the job for them. Champions League, maybe they could have gone a little bit further. They would have been liked a little bit further, but he couldn't have done any more. And he got fed up with the club. The fans got fed up with him because the fans are basically bored with the status quo at the moment. So any manager who can't deliver anything higher is going to be gone. And Pellegrino wasn't the first choice of the club. They admitted they approached Villas-Boas for one to try and take over, but he declined them to take over as Spurs instead. So I think Pellegrino, the way the fans are, very, very trigger happy, very upset. The way the president is, I think if they don't improve the next few games, they'll admit they made a mistake by picking a coach who doesn't have a lot of experience at this level and move on to someone else.
But Tim, I saw them in Munich, and I must say I was very disappointed. Yes, they had a game plan. They tried to defend and then get lucky on 1 or 2 chances that they created, but they only really created a chance in the 90th minute when they were 2-0 down. Where are the goals going to come from? Where's the creativity in midfield that will see them finish 3rd? It just looks to me like a team that's had, as you said, so many that been losing so many good players in midfield, and with the exception of Soldado, I don't really see any individual quality to take them very far.
They have to play sort of defensively, because in a way that they have 2 of the worst centre-backs that are currently in La Liga.
No, I agree with you, but that's not the kind of football that's going to take you into the Champions League next season, is it?
But then is that his fault, or the fact that his squad just doesn't have the talent?
No, I'm not blaming him. I'm just saying, I'm not sure they will finish in the Champions League with what they've got to their potential.
A coaching change would help.
I'm not sure it's the coach's problem. That's the point I was making to Tim. I think the team itself has become so weak that it might not be an issue of who's sitting on the bench. I just don't see enough quality. I mean, I saw them in Munich, and they were very, very disappointing.
There's hope to come. They do have Ever Banega, the guy who ran over his own foot with his own car, and to come back. He's very good, but it's going to take him a while to come back. And Fernando Gago, I don't think he was there, correct me if I'm wrong, in the Munich game, but after a head injury. So the central midfield will improve a little bit. There's Feghouli, who's having a good season, but he's just one of those players that we sold if they can get any money for him. And Roberto Soldado can't carry the team on his own up front. There's Jonas, who's not consistent enough. They brought in Nelson Valdez on a free, and he's never going to score enough goals to support Soldado. And it makes me wonder why a club like Valencia didn't pick up someone like Michu, for example, just to give a little bit of oomph up front, just to give a little bit of they're just lacking a lot of fire, Valencia. They're a team who are drifting, and it's not really their fault because they can't move up, and the only way down is down for them. But I agree with you. I think that they might struggle for the Champions League because Atletico Madrid have got some consistency now, and I think their favourites are third place at the moment. And there's a few other teams like Malaga who might fancy their chances of getting fourth.
What about Mallorca? Do they have any chance of finishing in the top 6 after a great start to the campaign?
Well, I'm going to say I predicted the top 6 finish for them last season based on the strength of, beginning of this season, based on the strength of last season, where they came very, very close to making it. It's Joaquin Capirossi, who's a very underrated manager. Every team he manages improve. What he does, he can just take average players, make them very focused, make them very organised, and just impose a huge amount of enthusiasm in team spirit into them. They're not the prettiest to watch, but they're extremely effective. Just to give some stats from the victory over Valencia, they had 3 chances on target. One of them was at Diego Alves that he fumbled and went in. 37% possession, no corners in the game. They tend to win their games 1-0, 2-1, 2-0, no more than that. But they're extremely hard to beat. They just grind you down. And I think it's fantastic because, again, he's doing great things with very, very small budgets and very, very limited teams.
So they're basically last season's Levante, that kind of story.
A little bit, but they're less kind of like plucky people from nowhere. I think with Joaquin Capirossi, he's got such quality and great history in the previous clubs. He's one of the founders of the current Athletic Bilbao side, you could say, before Marcelo Bielsa took over. And he's produced so many great players from Spain's youth ranks in the past during his time at Sevilla, people like Sergio Ramos and Reyes and Navas. So wherever he's gone, he's just been he's improved the club immeasurably, and that's what he's doing at Mallorca. So I wouldn't call it a fluke, no, just a natural progression for them.
Well, maybe he can take the Valencia job if it's available in a month. But thank you for speaking to us, Tim. That's sadly all we have time for on Spain. But do catch us after the break, and we move on to Raf's favourite league, Germany. We'll see you then. Welcome back to the World Football Show, although I'm starting to think it should really be called the European Football Show, considering that we're now moving on to Germany, and it's unlikely that we'll be discussing anything but Europe today. But tell us about what's going on with Dortmund, because I understand, of course, that they lost to Hamburg, which no one, certainly wasn't on the cards, especially considering all the problems going on with Hamburg. But Van der Vaart inspiring his team to victory. Dortmund, what's going on?
Well, you're right. I mean, nobody could see this coming. Dortmund unbeaten in 31. Hamburg yet to pick up a point. It was all made.
It was written in the stars for
an away win
upset
for Dortmund, and it didn't happen because Hamburg played with real passion, with belief for once. All the changes that Thorsten Fink, the coach, made for once paid off, and Van der Vaart was inspired. Only in the second minute, he already put in a fantastic cross for Son to score the first goal, and then he played a killer pass for the second ball. He covered the second most kilometres on the pitch. I mean, this is Raphael van der Vaart we're talking about, okay, the luxury player from Tottenham. He was a guy possessed, and he kind of got the whole team going. And for once, there was a kind of atmosphere of confidence in the ranks, and Adler in goal was absolutely fantastic. Son scored another brilliant goal, and Dortmund made huge mistakes on both sides of the pitch. They missed a lot of chances. They should have drawn this game 4 times over, at least, perhaps won it, because even at 3-2 down with a few minutes to go, they had lots of chances. And at the back, Hummels and to a certain extent Subotic made those individual mistakes that we saw from them last year in the Champions League. Just lack of concentration. Other people are saying, you know, this is now again the typical Dortmund that we see when they're playing in the Champions League. They can't keep it up for 2 games in a week. We'll know a little bit more about that because they're playing again on Tuesday away to Frankfurt, which is going to be a big test for them. But it's again a bad start for them, exactly like they did last year. And we know what happened. They lost, I think, the 8th game of the season against Hanover.
So it's nothing to worry about?
Well, I mean, it depends on how they react. It depends if it's just a blip or if it's the start of another run like they did last year, or if it's indicative of them not quite growing as much as a team and perhaps not quite progressing to the point where they can live with a team like Hamburg and live with making mistakes and still get a result. They're still a side in a sense that need to, a little bit like Juventus, need to go all out, all guns blazing to get wins. And when they do, no one can deal with them. But when they don't, mistakes can creep in. And of course, we know that there's a correspondence, there's a correlation between fitness levels and lack of concentration. And you just wonder if it's too much to ask of them, without much of a rotation policy, to play Ajax on Tuesday and then play a team like Hamburg on Saturday. It shouldn't be, but perhaps it still is.
Well, Ajax was deemed to be sort of the easiest matchup when you consider what they're going to have to face afterwards. Yeah. So, you know, that was it. They're always a side that sort of suffer with lack of concentration at times, and they are the one that have to go out all guns blazing. But it strikes me that sometimes they don't seem to have a real leader on the pitch that can sort of calm them down and get them to act appropriately or just to get their bearings together and go for it. And they're relying quite a lot on Klopp and what he can do on the sidelines.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, they're quite a collective side. They don't have that leadership principle, and that's their strength, of course, in a way.
Yes, of course.
And you could say it's their weakness. I think Nuri Sahin, you know, was obviously a guy the season before last who settled everyone down, not because he's a big man who would sort of shout at people, but simply because he kept the ball
and the tempo,
brought it, as we say in Germany, brought a bit of geometry and order into the match, even when things weren't going so well. And now they're a lot more up and down, and they lose the ball quite quickly, and they love to play with these quick transition moves, but of course that means that they also lose possession quite quickly and then have to be defending, and sometimes the centre backs are isolated a little bit, and they get into these 1v1 situations where even the best make mistakes.
And what about Hamburg? Do you think the fact that they've got Van der Vaart would mean that they possibly now can start gaining the points that they need? I mean, he's brought with him sort of, you know, the brain of the team. He's quite a leader now, and he's inspired, and he's sort of inspiring everyone around him. Is it getting a little bit rosy for Hamburg now?
Well, yes, but from a very low point. I mean, they were so far down in terms of points.
They couldn't get any worse, could they?
But also morale. I mean, there was a sense that this is gloom and doom. This is our last season in the top flight after 50 years uninterrupted membership. You know, this is the one we're going down, and now he's changed that around a little bit. The mood has turned, but you know, there's still problems. I think defense with Westermann and Mancien, centre backs, will always concede goals. I think up front they still haven't got a proper striker. They rely on the midfielders, on Van der Vaart, on Son to come in, or even on the centre backs from that ball situation. So I think they'll continue to struggle, but they should have just enough now to avoid a sort of total doom and gloom relegation nightmare this season.
You know what, it is looking a little bit like it did last season. So Dortmund stutters and Bayern Munich, you know, are just flying high. They already sort of came down and paid all the money and like, look, we're still big, we're still going to spend the cash regardless of what happens. And they're doing really well. Do you think this is the fact that they're just starting well and they haven't really been tested effectively? Because they said they were scared of against Valencia, but it didn't really look it when they were playing that match. Valencia came out, like you said, very defensive, nothing special, and they're doing so well in the league. Is it really the case of they've, you know, new players have come in, there's a whole belief system, and they want to make amends for what they did last season? Yeah,
I mean, there's a lot of things. So first of all, yes, they have a huge motivation to go one better because they finished runners-up in all competition, which is very painful, especially for a club like Bayern and for these players. You know, they want to get back to winning ways. Also, you know, Dortmund had all the plaudits. Everyone was falling in love with this team.
Oh, and for good reason.
Yes, absolutely. And Bayern was sort of seen as almost like kind of an old-fashioned, outdated model, you know, the way they play their football with the big names and the bigger stars and perhaps less of a collective game.
Yeah.
But a few things have happened. First of all, yes, they've had another great start like last year, where we asked ourselves forever, you know, when will the huge test come? And it only came about in November, December when they, I think, started dropping points in earnest.
And then they lost someone like Schweinsteiger, which was a huge blow to them at the time.
But now I think one thing that is definitely new is that the competition inside the squad is now such that you can rotate without a problem, without losing any real quality. I mean, Ribéry again wasn't there, and it hardly mattered. Schweinsteiger has now found a new sense of security after overcoming his long injury problems, and that makes a huge difference. And of course, you know, you've got the likes of Martinez, you've got the likes of Shaqiri putting pressure on the people who are on the pitch. So you know, as a player, if you don't have a good 45 minutes, you're out. It keeps everyone, especially at a club like Bayern, sometimes going to games thinking, you know, 60-70% will be enough. It keeps everyone under a lot more pressure. And I think on the pitch, you see the dividends of that. Having said that, Schalke, who we all thought were going to be a huge test, put them under pressure for about 10 minutes either side of the first half, and then completely collapsed when Bayern scored the second goal through Thomas Müller, which is a fantastic individual bit of improvisation, well worth checking out. And again, the big test didn't quite arrive. So, you know, I mean, they're flying at the moment. There's
but
no
we don't
reason.
Really know
there's no reason to suggest it's not gonna continue. The real test, I suppose, will come A, if Dortmund get knocked out in the Champions League and we have the repeat of the pattern from last year, or B, when they themselves get deep into the Champions League, if they can still do what they're doing now, which is rotate so brilliantly and deal with the pressure.
Well, I always gather that when it comes to Bayern Munich, they care a lot more about doing something in the Champions League than they do when it comes to their own league.
Not this year, because after 2 years of not
winning
winning
it... Is it a case of trying to get back the
absolutely.
revenge
I mean,
on
3
Borussia
years,
Dortmund?
1 year is bad. 2 years is a terrible indictment, and 3 years is just... it's probably the end of the club. I mean, that's how they would see it. If they don't go back to winning the championship, it's not something they can tolerate, especially not if Dortmund were to win it a third time. So it is almost out of the question. They have to win the title by all means. The Champions League, yes, of course, because of the traumatic end to the season, because of losing at home to Chelsea, the final. They want to go on better, but they know themselves that this is not something that you can really plan. It's a very fine margin when it comes to semi-finals and finals. You can't go into the league in August and think about the final in May. But what you can do is concentrate on the league to the extent that they're doing now, and that's why you see these good results.
Okay, now we have to talk about the story because it's the romantic story of the Bundesliga, which is Frankfurt. Their fourth consecutive win, and they're breaking records as a side that's just been promoted.
Why?
What's their story? Yeah, I mean, what's going on?
Yeah, I mean, people are kind of scratching their heads a little bit and trying to explain just where these good results come from.
Although I was very impressed with Freiburg last season, and do you think this is just a... Yeah, exactly. Do you think this is another reason?
Well, I think one thing you have to say, that Armin Fee, the manager, is very good in riding waves. His teams, when they do well, he manages to keep everyone ticking over. And with that kind of relaxed attitude and just letting things sort of naturally progress, if they're moving in the right direction, he won the league with Stuttgart when no one expected it in 2007. And this is a little bit similar. The guy's very cool. You know, he puts very little pressure. He has a very settled team. He's been basically picking the same team throughout the season. They're probably more together than any other side. And what he did in the second division last year is basically just pick the best players from other second division teams. And you'd think on paper they might not be good enough, but because they have the togetherness and because they've been playing together and they sort of know each other, it's been enough to win 4 out of 4. Now, the real test for Fee will come, as it has come before, at places like Hamburg and Wolfsburg, where it really didn't work for him, is once, you know, the results don't go his way, because he's not a manager who is very good at turning things around. He's, as I said, he's good at riding waves.
Well,
but when the wave is going the other way,
then he doesn't know how to break the cycle.
He doesn't know how
basically
to paddle out of it.
But then they've got that huge match against Dortmund coming up, and that is something that we will see. Firstly, if Dortmund can really overcome this disastrous split that they're going through, and whether or not Frankfurt are any good.
Yeah.
But I do think that when you have the luxury of playing your same 11 all the time, that it can give you that continuity that other teams don't have because they don't know who to play, which is the reason why I think Inter's suffering currently. But do you think that this is just going to end whenever they get a big match?
Yeah,
I mean, very hopeful.
No, I mean, look, you have to be realistic, and they themselves are thinking of 40 points minus 12. So, you know, the 12 points that they've won so far, they're not thinking, great, we're getting to Champions League. They're thinking, okay, we've got 28 more to go to before we can reach safety. And that's how they're going to approach the Dortmund game as well. I think they're very realistic about what the squad can do. If they finish in the top half, it would be a fantastic achievement. If they finish 15th or better, they'll take that now.
Right.
So, you know, it's not a question of them sort of coming back to the glory days of the early 90s with Andreas Müller and Toni Yeboah, etc. That's not the same side. And it's going to take a few years for them to get back into that. But just to come back and to start so well is great for any newly promoted team, because they usually struggle.
It is a romantic story, and one that I personally hope will continue. But do join us after the break, where we'll tell you more what's happening around the world. See you then. Hello and welcome back to the World of Football show here on Sports Tonight Live. I'm still Mina Rozuki, and I'm still joined by Raf Honigstein. Raf, what do you think about this? So Qatar-owned Paris Saint-Germain opened talks over a €100 million a year shirt sponsorship deal with the Bank of Qatar, and this is to replace their $3.5 million deal with Emirates.
Yeah, it's not that easy. I understand that it needs to generate revenue to offset all the expenses and to fall under financial fair play regulations. But UEFA are not complete idiots. They understand that, you know, as an owner, you can just come along and say, I will sponsor you now for €500 million. So whenever there's an interested party transaction, i.e. in this case, they have to prove that the Bank of Qatar is completely independent to the Qatari owners, which will be difficult.
Yeah.
If there is a close relationship between these two parties, then UEFA can say, no, we will only look at the real market value. So they look at the most expensive shirt sponsorship in the world, which is currently Man United's new deal with Chevrolet, and I think that's worth about £40 million, maybe $50 million, something around about that. And they say the rest we will discount, will disregard. So even if they do make a €100 million deal with the Bank of Qatar, UEFA will only allow them to put €50 million in, and I'm sure they'll give them a warning because regulations are not designed to be circumvented that way.
So there's no loophole. We do have Matt Spiro with us on the phone. Hello, Matt. Can you hear me?
Hi there. I'm not hearing you very well at the moment, I have to admit.
Okay. Right. Well, I was going to tell you because basically I understand that in Turkey you've got Trabzonspor, which are building a hydroelectric something or other in order to generate revenue, and they're only needing to pay about 50 million. But Platini said that they need to get creative in order to generate revenue so that they can get by these financial fair play rules. Do you think that PSG will manage to get away with it? Because for Raf, he thinks it's practically impossible.
Well, I think they've got a lot of potential, Paris Saint-Germain, and I think they can increase their marketing revenues significantly in the next 5 years. And I know the financial fair play plans are being brought in very progressively. So, you know, they have got a job on their hands, but already there's, you know, I don't know about any hydroelectrics or anything like that, but they're certainly selling a lot more shirts, and they're attracting bigger crowds. The problem they've got is the Parc des Princes only holds just over 40,000, and they're having trouble getting permission to expand that. But you know, I think the potential for a big football club in Paris is still huge, and I think they're making good progress at the moment.
Okay, let's talk about progress on the pitch then. Do you feel that they've turned the corner? They have a good performance in the Champions League and another win in the league. Are Ancelotti's bad days where he didn't know what to do with these guys over, do you think?
They're definitely improving. I didn't quite get the end of the question, but they're definitely improving significantly. The turning point, I think, was the game away to Lille, where they went and won. They went 2-1 up quite early and really controlled the game from there. They've now won 3 in a row in the league. They were excellent against an admittedly fairly weak Dynamo Kiev side in the Champions League, but they are looking much better. The guy who's made the difference, now obviously Ibrahimovic is making all the headlines. He's got 7 goals in 5 league games, and he's been superb. But the guy who's really tying things together is a 19-year-old Marco Verratti, the young Italian who joined from Pescara, the Serie B team last year. He has been absolutely superb, and he looks like a really, really awesome prospect.
Well, he is Italy's hope to be the new Pirlo, and I've seen him play so far for PSG, and he knows exactly how to play it together, and he's joining up all the departments. He's got real confidence of the ball. He's got that intellect, and he seems to not have any fear despite his age. Yeah.
To see him run a game like he did on his Champions League debut, I mean, it shows his quality and his temperament as well. He's got a low centre of gravity, a bit like Pirlo. He's more. Some people have said he's, you know, a cross between Pirlo and Gattuso. It's probably better not to make all these comparisons, but he is very tenacious as well. He's not just a ball player. He's somebody who snaps into tackles. Ancelotti's been getting a little bit anxious because he's been doing all these little flicks and turns on the edge of his own penalty area, but he seems so assured he gets away with it every time. And it's just been interesting because they've got an awful lot of midfielders and pretty good midfielders, but it just hadn't been clicking. And now Verratti's come in, and they've just suddenly got this fluidity, and they've got a lot more confidence thanks to him.
Matt, tell us a little bit about Marseille, because they kept up their 100% record. Evian, perhaps not the most difficult side to beat, but still, can they do this until the end of the season? And do you think they're best in a position to actually win the title this year?
well, I'm not sure they're going to win all 38 games, but they're doing pretty well, aren't they? 6 out of 6. They've got Valenciennes coming up this weekend, which they're well capable of winning, and then they play at home to Paris Saint-Germain. So if they can go into that game with a 100% record, they're at home to PSG. It's going to be a wonderful atmosphere, and if they turn PSG over, suddenly they could be 9 or 10 points clear. And that would be interesting. It's been totally unexpected because Marseille, they lost some players in the summer. They bought hardly anybody. They lost Didier Deschamps. They got Elie Bopin, which was hardly, an inspirational managerial appointment, or it wasn't getting people excited anyway. But Boat's done pretty well. He's got André-Pierre Gignac at last scoring some goals and looking like a proper centre forward again. And they seem to have a good spirit all of a sudden. They seem to be determined to make up for a really poor season last season when they finished 10th. The worry for Marseille is they really don't have a squad. They've got kids on the bench, and as soon as they have a few injuries, they're going to be in trouble. But they're capable of beating the sort of lesser teams in France, and there are quite a few of them at the moment. So they could pick up an awful lot of points this season. And if they turn PSG over, then they'll certainly start believing down in Marseille they can do it.
Matt, just before I let you go, just give us a quick view on Joey Barton's debut for the team.
Well, it wasn't great. You've got to say. He was on the pitch for around about an hour. Marseille were 2-0 down to Fenerbahce while Barton was on the pitch. They managed to get a 2-2 draw after he went off. But I mean, he's not had a proper pre-season. He's got an awful lot of work to do, and nobody's sort of criticising him. It's going to take him some time to get up to speed. He's working very hard off the pitch in terms of his communication with the supporters. He's going around meeting Marseille supporters groups. He's become a bit of an iconic figure already, not really through his performances, but he could become extremely popular. And it's maybe good for him to have these Europa League games to sort of get up to speed with football in France, get to know his teammates. And, I think he's got very little to lose in Marseille. I think, they're a team that will respect him, that probably need his fighting qualities, his experience, and I think it's going to be quite an interesting one. The referees are sending an awful lot of players off at the moment in France, and the feeling is that Barton might have a few problems. He's going to have to be a bit careful with his tackles early on, but it should be interesting.
It should indeed. Thank you so much for coming on to our show, Matt, and hopefully we can talk to you in the coming weeks about the progress in France.
It was a pleasure.
Why did you tip them, Marseille, to win the league?
You know what, it was almost by default because I looked around and none of the other teams really convinced me. I thought Montpellier will struggle to repeat the heroics from last year. I'm not convinced by Lyon. They're really a team rebooting. And PSG, after all the struggles from last year, I thought it's going to be another year where they're just trying to learn to grow. And I think Marseille, with the home support and with the history that they have, even with not a great team, they always have this kind of little bit about them. My money is still on PSG, but that is all we have time for this week. So please do join us next week, same time, same place, same football chat. Thanks to our Honigstein. See you then.